Hi there. At the end of the last video, I had just married a witness boy. And you guessed it, that was Ralphie. I married Ralphie. Big, tall, giant Ralphie. And here I was, little size 5 Brenda. And so we were certainly a funny looking couple walking down the aisle and on the dance floor. It was not the romance like I had experienced with my first husband where we were cuddled right here. It was kind of like one of these things. And I guess that should have been like some sort of metaphoric premonition of what our life was going to be like, because it was. And I always regretted not listening to that little pebble in my shoe telling me that I should not walk down the aisle. Really, within about 3 months, I knew that I was in a mess because I felt more like a mother than a wife. I just looked at the clock and it's 11:11. And I felt very unevenly yoked. I was a responsible person. I knew what it meant to take care of life's responsibilities. Monday was cleaning the house and taking care of the yard. Tuesday was going to buy the groceries. Wednesday was field service. Thursday was take care of the car and gassing it up and washing the car and getting the tires rotated or whatever had to be done. Friday was kind of my off. It was a play day. And then Saturday, of course, was service, and Sunday was service and meeting, and it all started over. And in all of that, I still worked, and I always worked. Our whole entire marriage, I was the one that was working, and Ralphie had jobs here and there, but he never stayed with any job longer than, maybe I think a year and a half was the longest he ever made it without either quitting, being injured, getting fired, or ultimately disabled for whatever reason. He loved disability because on disability you didn't have to do anything and you got a check. So, and he got really good at that. He came from a household similar to mine in that it was there was 5 kids in the family, and his parents were they were not in the truth when they got married. They were not Jehovah's Witnesses. Boy, isn't that funny how that sneaks up on you like that? But they were not Jehovah's Witnesses when they got married. She was in the military, and he was, I'm not sure. I know he was a piano player. And they got married because she was pregnant. And then years later, it came out that it was not the twins that she was pregnant with. It was another child, and he hit her, and she lost that baby. And I can't even let myself feel the feelings of that right now, because then I'd have to stop, and I don't want to stop. So, so they became Jehovah's Witnesses later on, but they were always, unwell people emotionally, for various reasons. The alcohol was a big part of that. Bipolar was a big part of that, and it was actually on both sides. And they ended up having twins, and then they had Ralph, and then they had Matthew, and then they had Rachel. So they ended up with 5 children. Very dysfunctional household. Always living beyond their means. And Ralph's parents divorced the year that we got married. And that was a chaotic, mess for kind of everybody involved. Not the least of which was their children, who were young at that time. They still had 2 children that were, they had thrown out Matthew at age 14 or 15. and Rachel was still living at home, but she lived with her mother. And they came and moved really close to us. And so there was a whole another chaotic load for us to kind of help them navigate through the split up of their marriage while we were trying to deal with the first year or two of ours. And it was difficult because I had a different work ethic. It was important to me that my house was clean and my house was well kept, that I took care of my car before it became an emergency, that I paid my bills before my utilities got turned off. And that was not the way Ralph handled things. So I felt very much more like a mother than a wife, trying to teach him to do those things, but he was very resistant. And so I was seen as, the unsubmissive wife. And I didn't know how to live this life of just chaos and coming home and not being able to flush my toilets because my water had been turned off. I didn't understand how that would happen when he would spend money on other things, ridiculous things. And yet I had heard his parent say to him one time, be sure and always take care of your wants first, because you'll always have things that you need. And, I lived in frustration a lot in those first couple of years, trying so hard to balance, being respectful of my husband and then at the same time live in this life where I was the one that went to work. I was the one that brought home the money, and yet the money was being spent on like dumb things. I was the one with the credit line, and I would come home and there would be all of these things that had been bought on a credit card. And where did this credit card even come from? And it was in my name, and yet things were being put on it. So that was a lot for a young wife to handle when I had had a much different life previously. And so we did have, meetings with the elders, and it was almost always, well, Sister Shumway, if you would just be more respectful of your husband, if you would just keep going in service and keep praying. And I did all of those things, and that was our life. And then we had some friends in the hall, and he was an elder, and she was a kooky, quirky little gal, and I loved her to death. They ended up having a baby, and I was always a maternal type person, and I wanted to have a baby, and I thought, sure, let's have a baby. So we planned it, and we got pregnant right away. And I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. It ended up being a great idea. So one of the best things that I ever did, because I got my sweet Dylan as my son. And so how lucky can you get? But that was a rough pregnancy. Just because I didn't have the kind of support of, a husband with a job, first of all. It was all on my insurance, and I was still working, and I was sick. I was a school bus driver, and I would, bring my bucket with me on the school bus because I would get sick, and thankfully it wasn't, all day. But when I wasn't driving school bus, like during the holidays, I didn't get to rest. I went to work for Kelly Girl, and I was secretary during that time too. So when I went into labor, this one afternoon, my water broke, and I was at my parents' house, and I called my husband, and I said, this is what's happened. And he was mad at me, because he was at Sam's Club. That was his place where he loved to just go in and roam the aisles and bring home, loads and loads of stuff. That was 27 years ago, y'all, when Sam's was like brand new. And he was upset that my water had broken. So he came home, and we did get everything together and went to the hospital, and I was in labor for 19 and a half hours. And as he did not stay with me, it was at 4 p.m. by the time we got to the hospital, and he was cranky and he was hungry. And so his mama took him to go eat Chinese food. and my brother stayed with me. And I remember that was a sweet moment that I will always cherish, that my brother stood there and held my hand and reminded me to take breaths. Inhala, exhala. Not exactly like that, but, Jane the Virgin fans. Of which I was not back then because I couldn't. So anyway, after 19 and a half hours of my husband videotaping, we watched Dances with Wolves, which is like subtitles. And that was so irritating. I just needed somebody to just be there and help me focus on what was happening with me. But he was having so much fun with this gadget that he had borrowed. And by the time my son was born, that next morning, he went into fetal distress, and I had to be put under general anesthesia. And my baby was born, and that video camera died, and I have no footage of any of my birth. I think somewhere there's this one of these little cassette tapes that I found, and somehow got to listen to it a few years ago. There's like a half a second of blip of just this flash of the little crib in the OR. And I couldn't even see like a person, but I could tell that, there was a baby in there. But there was just this little sound, and that meant everything to me, that I got to experience that much of it. But I slept, of course, off general anesthesia like you do, and woke up about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and had loads of family members in my room with me. And it was his mom was there, his twin sisters were there, some of my family came in, and of course there I was with my brand new baby who hadn't been fed yet, and I had to learn how to breastfeed. That was a brand new thing. And so that was a little bit of a struggle too, and I worked through it. I was always around people who breastfed their babies, so it never even occurred to me that I wouldn't or couldn't do it. So I just fought through all the struggles that you have there in the beginning, your first time. But that day specifically, there was a lot of people in my room, and by the time those people left, I was still, sleeping off general anesthesia, and I napped. And when I woke up that evening, and of course people came and visited us that evening too, because that's the way people are. They just show up at the hospital. They have no idea. They just want to see the young baby, and of course you want to show off your young baby. And I was exhausted. And by the time everybody left, I just fell in my bed, and I was so tired. And Ralph was mad. He was mad because I had spent my whole day visiting with other people and not with him. And he was really going to pull that. And he was whiny and a crybaby. And this is kind of what happened all the time in our marriage. I would be exhausted from either, working or whatever, having a baby, having major abdominal surgery and having a baby. And I would have to try to make him feel better. And he chased me around my hospital room at North Hills Medical Center in North Richland Hills, Texas. I remember him chasing me around that room, and I remember looking up at the sky and going, Jehovah, are you seeing this? Because I know you have to be seeing this. This isn't the way it's supposed to be between a husband and a wife. But that's the way it was. That's the way it always was. And so I tried to make the best of it. I tried to do the best that I could to be a good mom to this new baby, and for us to work on our relationship and be a better sister and be a better, everything. But it was rough. And before my baby was just even a couple of months old, here we were dealing with all of this mental illness with my husband. And so we went to we went to a place in Grapevine, Texas. It was a mental health facility that had a program for Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'll tell you more about that in the next video, because this one's getting too long because I love to ramble. And thank you for putting up with my rambling. But I will pick up with being admitted to this Grapevine facility and how I got to be the patient instead of him. So what do you think about all that? Thanks so much for being with me here today. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and thanks so much for listening and for your comments, and your story matters too. So get all brave and tell your story. It's scary, but without fear there is no courage. So